Few men have had such an impact on an industry across the world. YK Hamied, chairman of Cipla, has not just been a pioneer in creating India's pharmaceutical industry. He has been an innovator who pretty much rewrote the rules of the game. There was a lot to cover when we caught up with him, but I began by asking him what he felt of the many battles he had fought and the image as the Robin Hood of pharmaceuticals that he had created for himself.
The healthcare industry is different from other industries because this is directly connected with saving lives. And I think that's where the figure, say you said Robin Hood, comes in. We are saving lives. And to do that, one requires, in the context of India and the third world and the developing world, we require access to medicines at affordable prices.
That thought created an entire industry in India, and we'll come to that. But when you came back from Cambridge, what was it like? Because Big Pharma, the MNC farmers dominated the entire landscape.
They dominated the entire landscape, even post-independence, right up to 1972. September 72, the patent laws of India changed. We Indians, who were very, very small at the time, started fighting the government that, look, we are following today the British patent law of 1911. And this fight took 10 to 12 years of fighting. We were not fighting on patents. What we were fighting for, that a country like India, even at that time, could not afford a monopoly in healthcare. And that was a big fight. And it took 12 years. And ultimately in September 1972, Indira Gandhi passed the bill, the Patent Act, no product patents, only process patents for 7 years. And that gave us the legal freedom to manufacture any drug internationally known. We could manufacture in India and sell it in India and elsewhere, wherever the laws were similar to India, at affordable prices.
Dr. YK Hamied was among those who pushed India to adopt the process patent regime that allowed Indian pharmaceutical companies to copy, through a different process, big drugs and so bring down costs. That started in 1972. But it's a testimony to the prowess of companies like Cipla that the ramp-up was fast.
In 1960, when I came back, I felt that the foundation and the backbone of the pharma industry is not the tablets or the capsules or the injections. It is who manufactures the active ingredients that go into those products. So in our own small way, Cipla had started the manufacture of what is called now APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. And when this law changed in 72, we were already in that area of manufacture. So that is what gave a boost. And we did that. We reverse engineered many products. In our company alone, for the first time in India, we must have marketed at least 20 to 40 so-called new chemical entities for India. And by 1984, we were ready to license to get US FDA approval.
What was the compulsion for the industry to go out overseas at that point? Because what's interesting is that you could have been pretty satisfied servicing a very growing market. What compelled the industry to start looking at as suppliers of generics overseas?
We were not looking so much for that because we were looking at that time only to supply the active raw materials. We were not looking to export finished dosage forms because till a few years ago, the stigma was there. Oh, Indian products are not very good. But today, India is regarded as a pharmacy capital of the world. And
so what led to that change? That
I think what
change
led
in
to
mindset?
the change, that it gave us, after 1972, the freedom to manufacture whatever we wanted. So the technology base of India, of the pharma industry, expanded. And not only Cipla, but many companies took up the challenge of producing raw materials.
From APIs, Indian companies moved to generics. But the turning point for Cipla and in fact the entire Indian pharma industry came later. Between 2001 and 2004, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, Cipla put out the lowest cost cocktail of anti-AIDS drugs that made this company a game changer in world healthcare. Hamied says his company stumbled upon this opportunity.
In 1991, a very close friend of mine from Hyderabad, government laboratory, comes to me, Dr. Ramarao, and says, look, I have developed a process to make a drug called AZT. I did not know what AZT was at the time. It was the first and only drug in 1991 to be used against HIV. We went to the government together and Cipla took up the challenge to produce AZT. We did it in 93, marketed the product, no sale. We sold it in India for $2 a day against the international price of $12 a day. There were no takers.
Why was that?
Too expensive. Even $2 a day in those days was expensive. So we shut down the whole project on HIV.
And you threw away 200,000 pills.
That's right.
And then?
That's right. Then in 1996, I read a paper which said that a combination of 3 drugs could help alleviate the suffering of HIV and AIDS. And I took up the challenge again. And by the year 2000, we were ready with our cocktail.
That's in 4 years. That's quite commendable.
Years. Yeah, we made because we had the ability to produce the active substance.
The scaling up was easy.
Scaling up of the raw materials. So we did that. And then came the big confrontation with the international community at the European Union. In fact, virtually to the day, it was on the 7th of February 2001, virtually 13 years ago, when we announced that we would give the cocktail at under $1 a day. And that phrase changed the whole concept of treatment for HIV. And what even today gives me immense satisfaction, that at that time, 13 years ago, hardly 2,000 to 4,000 people in Africa could afford treatment. 8,000 Africans were dying per day. And today, over 9 million Africans are being treated for HIV/AIDS.
By offering the lowest cost drug for the dreaded HIV virus, Cipla didn't just become famous, it transformed the way the world saw Indian pharmaceuticals. But how did Cipla manage to shake up the industry? More on that when we return. Cipla is not only one of India's best-known pharmaceutical companies. Over the last decade, it has also been one of the most respected after it brought a cocktail of affordable anti-AIDS drugs that millions use to this day. But how did it manage to do this? And why was it so successful when no one else was?
The cocktail consisted of 3 drugs made by 3 different companies. Now they're also the multinationals that don't talk to one another. They could have collaborated among themselves and produced a cocktail. They didn't do that. So the 3 drugs sold individually totaled $12,000 per patient per year. We made all the 3 actives, put them together in one tablet and gave it at less than $1 a day.
Once the demand for that came in, it was huge, and you had to scale up at the back end. How did you go about doing that? Because that's often the biggest challenge for an Indian company, especially a manufacturing company, to be able to scale up and organize the supply chain to be able to service markets.
In our case, we were lucky that we found very, very good partners in China. China, like India, is very strong in their basic chemical manufacture. So we partnered with Chinese and we did it jointly. The other thing in the AIDS thing that we did, our original cocktail now is right at the back end of usage. We are today producing a range of 20 anti-AIDS
So one triggered
drugs.
off a series of other innovations on that.
Of course. innovations. And where we Indians are very good at is what I term as incremental innovation. Something that's already there, if I can twitch it around, etc., that's incremental. We are very, very good. India is very good at incremental innovation. For example, there's a drug, say it's used in 200 milligrams per tablet. If I make it into a nano powder, maybe 100 is as effective as 200. So the dosage is lower, everything is lower. That's innovation.
Innovation helps Cipla stay ahead of the game in the battle against AIDS and a host of other diseases like malaria and neglected ones like thalassemia. But Hamied is up against a lot more as he tries to replicate all the success in oncology. This won't be easy.
When you look at oncology, one of the big factors in oncology, number one, is diagnosis. Do you know how many breast cancer cases there are in India today? At least, I think it's 25,000 cases, and they're all detected at a very late stage. What we require, therefore, number one, for cancer is proper diagnosis. Number two, it is a disease which is very much doctor dependent. 70% of all the medication for cancer are injectables. So it's very doctor dependent. And then the doctors decide what they want to use or not use. So it's a very different. But what my point is, that the drugs that I can legally produce for cancer, I will offer them at affordable prices. To give you an example, there are 2-3 of the drugs that are classified as NIBs. In India, the multinational companies' prices range from 1.5 lakhs to 3 lakhs a month for tablets. And we are giving them the equivalent between, say, 6,500 to the most expensive is 80,000 a month. But it's a very, very big difference even now.
You know, what you did with the cocktail of HIV drugs was done at a different time and space. There was an epidemic, a chronic epidemic, which people didn't understand. It was a big scare across the world, and our patent regime was different. In the current circumstance, will you be able to really break down costs of a lot of the critical drugs that you're looking at as a layperson? I mean, that's a question I would like to ask you.
It's a very interesting question.
Because there's a lot of other issues stacked against you right now.
That's right. We are saying that under the present system, whatever we can legally do, we will do. But there are newer drugs coming up so rapidly in the area of diseases such as cancer. There are new drugs today for hepatitis C.
You will not be able to keep pace with it because I think your cutoff is 1995,
right?
Yeah.
And that is a big, big bottleneck. I cannot produce the newer drugs that there are today for resistant TB. TB, hepatitis, cancer, I can't produce.
Despite the fact that most governments are pushing for lower costs in healthcare, the tight control on patents and the virtual monopolies enjoyed by companies in drugs means that it's not going to be easy for Cipla to replicate its success by offering cheap generic versions. The fact that India has also adopted the product patent regime makes it even worse. No wonder then that Cipla has begun to rework strategy.
I think where the strategy has changed has been that, like in 1995, we had 10% export, 90% local. Today, we are 55% export, 45% local. Maybe in 5 years' time, we will be 70% export and 30% local.
So what does this go global or globalization process mean for you? What's it going to look like?
I have to have a global team to manage a global affair. And this is something that we have recently started about a year or two ago by employing people from international companies, etc., and they will take us forward. We are no longer a father-mother company like we were, say, 50 years ago. We are today very, very professionally run pharma company.
The other big bet you're making is on Africa, because you're already a well-known name across Africa, and I think your 2 acquisitions, and the first time you were actually going out, now putting facilities over there, you're actually getting into that market. Do you think that's going to be a big one for you?
South Africa is the main market. We are also in Uganda. We have a factory in Uganda. Essentially today we have been producing, say in Uganda, anti-malarials and anti-AIDS drugs. We will expand that to other areas as well. In South Africa, we are today among the leading suppliers of drugs in South Africa. So I think we'll maintain that.
40% of Cipla's export revenue comes from Africa, and Hamied has big plans there. But what's the future for the company and India's pharmaceutical sector as everything changes around it? More on that when we return. India is often referred to as the pill factory of the world. But given that Indian companies have always faced stiff competition from global pharma giants, how did they earn this reputation? Accenture Sriram Srinivasan explains.
What happened in the 1970s was that we changed our patent laws. So from recognizing product patents, we actually started recognizing only process patents. And this opened up a whole new set of vistas for Indian pharma companies to actually venture out into the world of trying to make different kinds of molecules, reverse engineering them, and actually also venture out into the formulation space. And the early innovators like Cipla, Ranbaxy, Dr. Reddy's made full use of this potential and grew significantly in the Indian domestic market. Throughout the 70s and 80s, they were able to take a lion's share of the domestic market and also perfect the art of moving, not just making APIs, but also making formulations and being able to sell them in the market. They became so good at it that they didn't just restrict themselves to India and start exporting pharma products. And by the late 80s and early 90s, many of them have actually developed quality standards which are good enough to actually launch in the West and became one of the largest exporters of products from India to the US and Europe and pretty much the rest of the world right now.
But experts believe companies will have to rework strategies after India adopted the product patent regime in 2005.
A lot of the things that they've done so far and has made them successful will no longer be true in the new patent regime. For instance, if you look at the domestic market, a bulk of the growth that Indian pharma companies have got has come from new product innovations, combinations that they have launched year on year. With the patent regime coming into the picture, that pipeline of products that they can launch will obviously keep getting narrowed down. But that doesn't mean the growth avenues stop for Indian companies. They just need to do different things. For example, they need to focus on brand building. They need to focus on making complicated products that they're very good at. They also need to focus on using that large field force that they have to improve access and reach. On the export front, Indian companies are already very competitive. They are one of the largest manufacturers of drugs in the world, and therefore a lot of the focus hitherto has been on faster, efficient means of innovating and reverse engineering. That will also continue to remain. I mean, the generics industry is here to stay, and that will continue to be a large mainstay of the exports globally. But what we also see will happen is Indian companies will start looking at newer and newer innovative ways, tougher to make generic molecules, getting into the whole new world of biologics and biosimilars, and also reaching the holy grail of actually looking at developing an NCE.
For companies like Cipla, the next few years will be tough, but it's already looking way ahead, and Hamied believes innovation that has helped his company stay ahead will remain the key.
We are looking, number one, at what products are coming off patent in the next 5 years, 10 years. Select from that, manufacture it, do the R&D on it, then get the product approved, then compare it with the originator product, and see that our product is totally equivalent to the innovator, and then be ready with the product when the patent expires.
At any given time, how forward are you thinking?
I think people today in India, including Cipla, are looking at products abroad that would expire in, say, in America, 2023, 2026, in that period. We are looking at, again, like I said earlier, within the framework of the law, within the framework of what we are allowed to do, we will do in various countries in the world. So in some countries, there are no patents. Maybe we'll produce in those countries, for those countries. In some countries where the patent laws are very strict, like in America, we will abide by the American laws and do more of the generic business. We will have our own developments of new things. Don't forget, we've also taken out a number of patents on devices, on inhalers, etc. There are 3 or 4 of our products that are selling internationally, where we've been the inventors, and so on and so forth. It's a mixed bag. You cannot say, I'll only do this or I'll only do that. You have to have a basket of strategies to compete in the world.
Ironically, while Cipla looks at innovation and new markets and the Indian pharma companies plan the next big wave in the world's biggest market, US, India itself is proving to be the most challenging marketplace. Despite the potential, given the scale of the healthcare problems in India, Hamied believes that the new product patent regime, which will manifest itself fully in 2015-2016, when a lot of products come off patent, will be debilitating for a country like India.
A drug of 1995 expires in 2015. So after 2015, all the drugs that are new drugs likely to come into India will all be under monopoly. Then you pay for an anti-cancer drug 3 lakhs a month, whether you can afford it or not.
And in a country like India, with the kind of statistics that you've spoken about,
That's right.
that can be a scary situation.
Very scary. And somewhere down the line, the Indian government will have to wake up. Today it's not bothered, but at some stage in the next maybe 10 years, you may go back to the period of 1960 to 1972 when we fought patents.
Will you be fighting that battle?
If I'm alive,
You will be fighting from the front, I'm sure.
I will, definitely. I'm still fighting, and I'm begging the government to have a in-licensing policy.
Last question, what are the 3-4 things that would really, that you would want to see happen
In India?
in India to get the industry really to rise up to its potential?
One is that today the basic API industry in India is very strong. They need to be encouraged, because the backbone of the industry is the ones who produce the raw materials. I think there has to be a bigger development into the biotech industry basket. I think looking ahead, if the government took us in confidence, gave us an infrastructure, a reasonable long-term drug policy that won't change, take the Indian indigenous companies in confidence, who are the backbone of the country. And you depend on us, and we will deliver. That's what I can say.
For one of the pioneers of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, clearly the battle is still not over. And sadly, this one is at home. But after fighting, winning, and rewriting the rules of the game, Dr. Y.K. Hamied seems in no mood to give up too fast.